So in the last video, we focused on expenditure switching policies for a country wanting to improve their trade balance. Let's spend a few minutes focusing on the ways in which you might use expenditure reducing policies to cut, control a trade deficit. Well, first of all, what are expenditure reducing policies? Well, they're basically any contractionary, monetary and or fiscal policy designed to bring down real incomes and aggregate demand. And if you do that, that in theory brings down and cuts the demand for imported goods and services. So, for example, higher direct taxes would cut people's disposable incomes. Cuts in real government spending might have an effect on the trade balance, particularly if the government is spending less on imported materials used in providing public services. An increase in monetary policy interest rates could bring down the demand for credit and perhaps increase household saving. Increasing the propensity to save means that people are spending less and therefore the demand for imports goes down. So examples of expenditure reducing policies, by the way, they're also known as deflationary policies, would include a rise in the burden of direct taxes, cuts in government spending on welfare, and also maybe cuts in government spending on public services. Now, in theory, expenditure reducing policies do help to reduce the trade deficit. I mean, deflating demand, deflating the economy, will depress the demand for imports. Higher income taxes, for example, cuts real disposable incomes. People spend less overall, and they spend less on imports as well. But of course, one of the evaluation points is that there's a risk, there's a trade-off potentially. You might be cutting living standards. There's a risk of causing damage to work incentives in the labour market if you raise income taxes. If you cut government spending in real terms, well, that lowers aggregate demand, and firms facing less demand from the government, for example, might try to export more, perhaps making use of their spare capacity. Again, there's potential damage to short-term growth. Fiscal austerity might improve a trade balance, and we've seen that in Greece, for example. But the danger is if you depress demand, that austerity leads to a fall in planned business investment. And if businesses aren't investing as much as they plan to, that actually could worsen the trade balance in the long term because you don't have sufficient productive capacity. Two key evaluation points coming up. The effectiveness, the impact of expenditure reducing policies does depend on the marginal propensity to import, MPM. In other words, if you reduce incomes in real terms, how much do people spend less on imported goods and services? Another key evaluation point is that these are deflationary policies. Well, okay, they're aimed at controlling demand, bringing down aggregate demand and reducing inflationary pressure. But there could well be a conflict with other macro objectives, such as maintaining low unemployment. In the next video, we'll think about some of the longer-term supply-side policies that might be effective in cutting a trade deficit.